We look at the first charges to come out of Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election. What's at stake for Republicans, especially in the Trump administration? State lawmakers are trying to rein in problem landlords in Milwaukee. Will the latest proposals fix the problem? And Raquel Rutledge talks about her latest story on troubles at Mexican resorts. Are popular travel websites censoring people's stories? All that, plus winners and losers, and your questions, today on JS on Politics. Welcome to JS on Politics. I'm your host, Mary Spicuzza. There was big news in Washington, D.C. this week when charges were brought against 3 former aides to President Donald Trump during his campaign. We spoke to editorial page editor David Haynes and Craig Gilbert about the latest developments. Here's what they had to say.
So I want to turn now to Craig Gilbert in Washington to talk about the Mueller investigation. Craig, the indictments came down this week of Paul Manafort and his colleague Rick Gates, and George Papadopoulos, who was a lower-level campaign official and served sometime at least in the Trump White House, pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. This is in relation, of course, to Mueller's investigation, the special prosecutor's investigation into the possibility of Russian meddling in last year's presidential election. But I guess what I'm wondering from you is, what is the potential political fallout for the Trump administration of these indictments?
Well, I mean, there's the obvious sort of distraction and controversy and turmoil created by a legal investigation and the cloud that casts, but also it has politically the potential to be hugely divisive within the Republican Party and among Republican members of Congress. We've already seen some Republican lawmakers, including Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, kind of call for Mueller's resignation and question his integrity. But you have people like Paul Ryan, the House Speaker, who've been out there on the record basically vouching for Mueller and saying that his investigation should proceed. There are enough Republicans who feel that way, yet they're going to get a lot of pressure from the Trump base and from some conservative media to start lining up against Mueller. Trump supporters don't like this investigation. When Mueller was announced, it initially provided some political relief to people like Paul Ryan, because then they could defer all questions about Trump and Russia to the Mueller investigation. But now that the Mueller investigation is happening in real time and we're getting indictments, they're kind of back on the spot again.
So let's talk about both Ron Johnson and Paul Ryan. What is Johnson's rationale for saying that maybe Mueller's investigation should be sidetracked? Well,
I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a tangled argument, but there are people on the right who believe that, one thing they believe is that Hillary Clinton is the one that should be investigated, not Donald Trump.
Right.
They believe that somehow Mueller is questions have been raised about his integrity and his ability to conduct a fair investigation. I think what you're really seeing, though, is just a lot of pushback on the investigation as it's moving forward. And again, you're going to see Republican lawmakers sort of caught in this bind where they're under pressure from some elements of the Republican base to totally repudiate Mueller. At the same time, a lot of them aren't ready to do that. A lot of them are on the record supporting Mueller. And there's all the sort of questions of letting the legal process work itself out. Now, the politics is going to get a lot worse if the White House and President Trump stop cooperating with Mueller and take Mueller on, go after Mueller directly, which would just sort of ratchet up all the internal turmoil within the party over this.
Yeah, and I might add that Trump is being urged to do that by people like Steve Bannon. But let's get back to Paul Ryan. So Paul Ryan is in this really difficult position with various factions in his own party, some wanting to do one thing, some another, either in regards to this investigation or just generally. What does this mean for his goals, particularly tax reform, which is now on the front burner?
Well, it is one more kind of potential complication. I just spent the last week driving around southwestern Wisconsin talking to voters after the election. I didn't hear a lot of clamor for tax for a tax bill or tax cuts. Certainly, I heard it from some people, but it wasn't widespread. What you did hear a lot of was people just saying, do something, stop kind of wallowing in this division and paralysis in Congress. So it's kind of a funny situation where Congress is sort of under pressure, certainly from their business supporters and certainly from elements in their base to pass a big tax cut bill. I don't think the nation as a whole is necessarily crying out for that, but they are crying out for action. So by failing to act, even on taxes, I think it does play into this perception that these guys can't get anything done. And in that sense, it's probably not helpful to the image of Congress. They do feel, Republican members do feel under intense political pressure after the failure of health care to get this done, but legislatively and policy-wise, it's hard, and they don't have big margins, so you have the same dynamic in that sense as the health care bill.
All right, Craig Gilbert, thanks so much. We'll look forward to that reporting.
Thank you.
Now I'm joined by investigative reporter Carrie Spivak, who's been covering Milwaukee landlords who try to game the system. Hey, Carrie.
How you doing?
Thanks for joining us. So there are some new bills circulating at the Capitol, one that just passed, but basically aiming to crack down on problem landlords. What does the one that just passed the Senate actually do?
The one that just passed requires that when a person purchases a property at a sheriff's sale, foreclosed property, that the deed is immediately registered with the county. And this was passed for Milwaukee a couple of years ago, and now it's going statewide. And the reason for that is the slumlords would sometimes buy properties, not bother recording the deed with the registrar's office, and that meant the poor guy who lost the property already in a foreclosure would still be getting the tax bill, water bill, etc. So this is a crackdown on that.
And then the next bills that are circulating, those are bipartisan bills, and they're also aimed at cracking down on problem landlords or the LLCs they use to try to kind of hide their identities. What would those bills do? Again,
this is going at the sheriff's sales, which is kind of weird. You got a sheriff's sale is ran by the sheriff, obviously, overseen by the court, and yet it's the pipeline where slumlords and problem landlords are able to buy properties that they rent out, the dilapidated, terrible properties, and they'll rent them out at high rates. And there's no background checks at all. So this would require that if a limited liability company, a LLC, purchases a property, they would have to tell the court that none of its members owe back taxes or are tied up with LLCs that owe back taxes, have building code violations. If you have back property taxes or building code violations on other properties that you may own, this will prevent you from purchasing any properties at a sheriff's sale. So it's basically trying to keep the bad guys out of the sheriff's sale. And it would also call for allowing counties to put sheriff's sales online, as opposed to now it's in the basement of a public safety building. Put them online to try to open up the process, increase the prices paid for foreclosed homes, let amateurs get in there and buy houses that they could do, purchase as fixer-uppers, that type of thing.
And Alderman Terry Witkowski at the city level, he has a proposal too that would try to kind of expose LLCs or problem landlords as well, and would involve the city attorney's office. What would that proposal do?
That would LLCs allow people to keep their identity secret. They're very common in business. Most of them are fine, legitimate companies. But the bad landlords have been using these to hide their identities. And this would basically set up a system where various departments in City Hall would look at the LLCs, and the city attorney, I guess, would be coordinating it, but you're looking for common addresses, common names of registered agents, anything you can find to try to draw that linkage, kind of what we've been doing here at the Journal-Sentinel, and figuring out who is behind these various LLCs.
Do you think all these proposals would help and kind of help prevent landlords from gaming the system?
It might help a little, but I'm quite sure they'll come up with new ways to game the system.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks. We've been following your reporting, and I'm sure we'll have you on again soon.
Thanks.
Thanks. We also spoke to Raquel Rutledge, another investigative reporter here at the paper, about her investigation into Mexico and problems at Mexican resorts. David Haynes spoke with her, and here's what she had to say.
So Raquel, you've been reporting since July on the problem of tainted alcohol and other problems at Mexican resorts. People who drank this alcohol and bad things happened to them. They were possibly assaulted in some cases. There's even been some deaths. Abby Connor from Milwaukee, a young woman, died there. Her brother was found injured. I think they were both in a pool when they were found. So really terrible things have happened. Terrific reporting, by the way. Now your reporting's taken a different turn, and you focused on TripAdvisor, which is a website that publishes ratings or reviews from the public about what they have found on their various trips. I just want to read a paragraph from your story. Since July, when the Journal Sentinel began investigating the mysterious death of a Wisconsin college student in Mexico and found widespread problems with tainted alcohol, derelict law enforcement, and price gouging from hospitals, more than a dozen travelers from across the country have said that TripAdvisor muzzled their firsthand stories of blackouts, rapes, and other ways they were injured while vacationing in Mexico. So what's going on here?
Well, yeah, I mean, the story just keeps taking different turns. It started, it just keeps evolving. It's nothing I would have anticipated, but as I was reporting and talking to folks about what had happened to them in Mexico, I kept hearing the same thing from people that, hey, they tried to warn others, they tried to post about it and let people know this is going on. Because one of the questions was, hey, why have I never heard of this? If this is happening so much, why haven't I heard about it? Well, this can't be true. I would have known about it.
And the authorities in Mexico weren't willing to, in many cases, take up these cases, right? So what other options did they have?
Absolutely. And the State Department has not been keeping records of those. They'll keep death records, but even in the case of Abby Connor, her death wasn't tallied as a death in Mexico because she technically died in Florida several days after drowning in Mexico. So the information has not been getting out there. And as I said, people were telling me they were trying to post their stories on TripAdvisor, and time again, they said they were rejected, that the stories were considered to be hearsay, or they were inappropriate, or they didn't meet guidelines for various reasons. And just in the course of the last several weeks, I came across a dozen people who said, hey, and they showed me evidence of, like, here's what I tried to write, here's what TripAdvisor said.
Including the woman in the lead of her story says she was sexually assaulted.
Yeah. Yes. There are some serious allegations of rapes and major injuries, blackouts, sicknesses, et cetera, that have not been included.
So TripAdvisor is a $1.5 billion company based in Massachusetts. And what's its business model? How does it work?
So it has a number of ways of generating money. One of them is cost per click. So it has online travel agencies such as Expedia and Priceline that are partners, as well as just hotel suppliers and restaurants and attractions, et cetera. But anyone who uses their site, there's a number of ways that TripAdvisor can make money from them. One is cost per click. And so that's if you and I are shopping for a restaurant, for example, or a hotel, and we click on one of the people or one of the companies on the search, they will pay TripAdvisor for our clicks. In 2014, they started going to an instant booking. They made that an option where they enter into agreements for commissions for some of the companies that they work with.
So they're getting money from the hotels who are being rated on the website when someone books. They get a cut of that.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So is there any evidence that TripAdvisor tried to contact authorities about what was happening at these Mexican resorts?
No, there's no evidence of that. I mean, one of the things that they did say since I've been interviewing them over the last number of weeks is that they are going to now engineer a new program that will help alert travelers to problems that maybe that are in the media that have gotten widespread attention, but they also feel like need to be on their site. So it's sort of a badge system. They have a reward and kind of a punishment system that they use for businesses.
System,
badge, yep.
Yeah, okay.
So that's their plan. I haven't seen it in action yet, but they did acknowledge that we sort of uncovered a weak spot for them where they do want people to be aware. I mean, that's that's the direction they're headed. At the same time, they're also still taking down reviews, so it's really hard to know.
Isn't a big part of their business, though, about being credible and reliable, providing credible and reliable information?
Absolutely. I mean, content integrity is very key for the success of their company, and they were built on that reputation of being a free billboard traveler advice. So they have that long history of being known for that sort of thing. So yeah, it is really important that they have, and they do have hundreds of people dedicated to policing content integrity. So yes, there's no question that that does matter. But you know, I guess after looking at this for so long and talking to so many different people about it, I mean, one of the like social scientists who research this and study this, I mean, their takeaway is that we as a society put way too much emphasis on user reviews. They're biased for a number of reasons, no matter who you're talking about, not just TripAdvisor, but that sort of user review that we all look at. Oh, it's 4 stars. And they all skew positive, because when you make a purchase, you're inclined to defend it already. You've already spent the money. You've already researched it. You expect to like it and enjoy it. So it's going to be skewed positive to begin with. And they call it the brag and moan factor. So people are more inclined to brag, I found this great place, you should know about it, or moan if they're very upset or angry, but there are very few in the between. The numbers of 2s and 3s are vastly underrepresented.
Well, you reported at one point, I think, that, and I forget the percentage you recall, of the numbers that are 4 and 5. It's quite a few. Right?
Yeah, in some cases we did an analysis. My colleague Andrew Amalika helped with us a lot, doing some of the data analysis. And in one region that we looked at, of the 100 big hotels in Quintana Roo, tourist area in Mexico where Cancun and Playa del Carmen are, it was 96% of the hotels listed on TripAdvisor had 4s and 5s.
Had 4s and 5s. Okay, so last question. What kind of a reaction are you getting so far to your story? Just published Wednesday morning in print. It's been online since, I think, Tuesday night. What kind of reaction are you hearing?
A lot of emails with people saying thank you for exposing this, because people do count on that sort of thing, and a lot of more people have said, hey, this has happened to us. I've gotten a bunch in comments that we've
happened
seen.
To us, what's happened?
Where they've tried to post reviews as well,
reviews
and they too have had their reviews rejected.
All
yes.
right. So I guess buyer beware, perhaps with TripAdvisor. Raquel Rutledge, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now I'm joined by reporter Bill Glauber, who you had an interesting story this week, and we're going to get to winners and losers, everybody's favorite. But before that, there was a Senate candidate who made some interesting comments about Paul Ryan, considering they're both Republicans. What did he have to say?
Kevin Nicholson, who's running for U.S. Senate against Leah Vukmir in the Republican primary, was overheard talking to some folks at the Jefferson County GOP event last week, in which he basically said that Paul Ryan has a light footprint in the state. Not something that you normally hear out of a candidate. And again, it was in an off-the-cuff back and forth with some folks. And, you know, he had to answer to that. Caused a bit of a kerfuffle because, you know, Paul Ryan is, you know, he may be going down nationally in terms of popularity, but he remains popular here, viewed as a reformer here. So he had to answer for that, caused a kerfuffle. I think we're going to see a lot of that in this campaign, where every little twitch is going to be a story. It's going to be a really rock'em sock'em primary, so it'll be interesting.
It's interesting because it seems like Paul Ryan, who has enjoyed high popularity ratings for years, has seen those numbers drop as he's kind of had this odd relationship with President Trump, where they were, you know, obviously adversaries during the primary, and now he's tried to not criticize him, and it seems like he kind of takes criticism for either being too critical of Trump and now not criticizing him.
Absolutely. And you know what else is happening is that, you know, Bannon, the super PAC associated with Steve Bannon, the former White House chief strategist.
Not a big Ryan fan.
Not a big Ryan fan, endorsed Nicholson. So, you know, he's walking a tightrope on this whole issue. He says he's supportive of Paul Ryan, but, you know, it remains to be seen how that plays out as these races unfurl in the next year. And it's a year away.
And you'll still be thinking about it every day.
Yes, so. Exactly.
All right, well, now it's winners and losers time. So who are your winners this week?
Okay, winner this week is Milwaukee and Waukesha. You know, they overcame these regional differences to cut this deal on water, the diversion from Lake Michigan. You know, Milwaukee had initially been against it because of the service area for Waukesha. Service area was crimped a little bit, And so Waukesha, which was going to get its water from Oak Creek, cuts the deal with Milwaukee, saves money in the process, and then Milwaukee gets about $3 million a year for the water. All the way around, a win-win. Love the picture of the two mayors, toasting with glasses of water. Very good story about regional cooperation, which you don't always see in this area.
Especially not between Milwaukee and Waukesha all the time, which obviously have some different political views.
Exactly. Well, the city of Waukesha actually does lean Democratic, I think, for the most part. But it's, but everybody mixes Waukesha City with the county at large, which is obviously the Republican heartland. But it was, a good news story, and I thought it was kind of terrific to see.
Yes. All right. What about your loser?
Well, the loser, I say loser. It's very controversial. Van Wangard and Janelle Brandtjen have come up with this reform bill for in the legislature for the Milwaukee Police and Fire Commission. Tom Barrett is dead set against it. Says it will politicize the Police and Fire Commission and will be onerous in terms of the financial. From the outside looking in, it looks like a bit of a handover to the unions and the police and fire unions who have supported Republicans. Looks like they get a lot out of this deal, and there could be potentially tens of thousands of dollars paid out as the disciplinary cases get dragged out under this new bill. It'll be interesting to see it going forward.
And it really does seem like they could have pretty lengthy appeals, because they could appeal to a circuit court, they could appeal to an arbitrator. If they don't like what the arbitration leads to, they could then appeal that decision to the circuit court. So it does seem like this could be a lengthy appeals process.
All the while getting paid.
Right.
Yes, it's something. You got some pretty good winners and losers.
All right, so my winner is Corey Mason, Racine's new mayor. Obviously, he is a fairly young mayor, especially for a Democrat. He's
in his 40s.
44.
He's practically a baby.
Spring chicken,
yeah.
Right. So obviously Democrats have had a lot of trouble having a bench of people who could run for statewide office. Many of them are criticized as being kind of baby boomers, as Scott Ross from One Wisconsin Now would say, and that there aren't a lot of Gen X Democrats in office. So I think that he, obviously it depends on how he does as mayor when he, after his inauguration next week. But I think it is a good sign that somebody will get a chance to see how they can run something instead of being another Dem in the Capitol who isn't probably getting a ton of bills passed.
Yeah.
So,
and your loser?
My loser is, we're going to say President Donald Trump, who has had another rocky week. There have been quite a few, but I think, obviously there were the indictments that came out this week. 3 of his former campaign aides are now facing charges as part of the special counsel's probe into Russian meddling. The White House is obviously trying to distance themselves from that, but clearly these are, there's going to be a connection to Trump when your former aides are being charged. And as much as you try to distance yourselves, there are going to be questions about who else in the campaign was involved. And, this obviously is not the end of the investigation, so more charges, more indictments could be coming, and it's hanging over his administration. Also, in the wake of the New York terror attack, it's obviously a very unfortunate incident. People killed, Americans, tourists, and he's been tweeting now this morning calling for the death penalty, which people are probably, prosecutors might not like to see the president calling for somebody's death before the case actually goes forward. It could kind of taint the jury pool. And he's been calling for an overhaul to the immigration system, which obviously right after the White House was saying that it was too early to talk about policy in the wake of the Las Vegas shooting, and they don't want to talk about gun policy, but he wants to talk about immigration policy. So it just seems like it's been a bad week for him that could lead to more trouble.
He's done nothing to unite the nation in the wake of this terrorist attack. It's quite astounding when you look at it, especially in comparison, obviously, to George W. Bush in the wake of 9/11. Just utterly astonishing and astounding to see his actions and words following this terrorist attack. May be good politically for him, but really, I think, corrodes the country in a number of ways.
It sounds like from what we're hearing that this is somebody who was radicalized in the U.S. He came from Uzbekistan, in 2010. So it does not sound like he was a, terrorist plotting anything when he arrived in the U.S., but it sounds like whatever he was exposed to.
He's the scariest kind of terrorist that you have out there now, allegedly, a homegrown, self-radicalized terrorist that's affected Europe. Obviously, these car attacks or truck attacks in Europe, specifically in Nice and others in France, in other parts of France, it's quite frightening. But New Yorkers go about their daily lives. They went to the Halloween parade just hours after the attack.
Yeah, well, it's a very sad case, and I think it has not been a good week for the White House. So we're gonna go on to viewer questions, unless there's anything you wanted to add about that one. Okay, so this one comes from John Casper, our frequent viewer. Thanks, John. He said this was actually a question from a while back, but he said, "Mary, thank you for your reporting about the Milwaukee Fire Department." I'm guessing he was referring to some of the budget cuts that are coming in the city budget, with cuts to 75 firefighters, 33 police officers. He said, will they support marijuana legalization to pay for more public safety? So that's an interesting one. Obviously, the city is facing a tough budget time. Do you think Milwaukee is going to lead a charge for legalization?
They can't even get a half-cent tax increase to pay for this. I doubt marijuana legalization would be in the cards in the current climate. But it does bring up an interesting point. Can you use marijuana legalization to fund services? And obviously they've gotten a great amount of revenue in Colorado. Obviously there's a societal cost with excess or more marijuana usage. Has to play out, see how it works out. So I don't see marijuana legalization on the cards on the horizon in Wisconsin.
It's funny because it does seem like the Milwaukee Police Union or the Milwaukee Fire Union clearly has a lot more sway in Madison at the Capitol than a lot of other city officials. So I don't think I would see Mayor Barrett being able to go to the Capitol and push for marijuana legalization, given that he can't get the half-cent sales tax.
Yeah, and I don't see Mayor Barrett pushing for marijuana legalization at all. Just doesn't seem like in his makeup.
Probably not anytime soon, but we'll have to stay tuned and see. Obviously, it's looking like the 2019 budget could be even tighter and tougher on the city than the 2018 budget. So who knows what the year will bring, but we'll stay tuned on that one. So that's all for today. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be back next week for JS on Politics.